experience. The thing that is full.
You're listening to Radio Free North America. I'm your host, J.D. Welton. Today, we're talking about history, or the erasure of our history. We live in unprecedented times, and we continue to find ourselves in aberrant situations with the Trump administration. While it is becoming more and more obvious that the administration is focused on returning the U.S. to some imagined past of white superiority, they continue to enforce their DEI initiative, erasing history in the process. On February 28th, it was reported that the final report of the Not Invisible Act Commission had been removed from government web pages. The act, a bipartisan law signed by Trump himself in his first term, was a collaboration between the Justice Department and the Interior Department to address, document, and respond to the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis, where Indigenous communities suffer from disproportionate rates of abduction, assault, and murder. Homicide is the third most common cause of death for Indigenous girls aged 15 to 19 and women aged 20 to 24. Since his inauguration, Trump has called on the General Services Administration to terminate the leases of 7,500 federal offices, including 25 regional offices of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and just recently rescinded a Biden-era executive order aimed at strengthening tribal sovereignty for the 574 federally recognized tribes. Other DEI eradication initiatives have attempted to erase Jackie Robinson, the Navajo Code Talkers, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Harlem Hellfighters, the Tuskegee Airmen and WASPs, Charles Calvin Rogers, and contributions from Indigenous Americans. The article on Jackie Robinson, though later replaced, illustrated his service in World War II. Private First Class Ira Hamilton Hayes, a participant in the famous raising of the flag on Iwo Jima, has also been removed from DoD websites. From 1942 to 1944, the Navajo Code Talkers were instrumental in every major Marine Corps operation in the Pacific theater of World War II. Axios has identified at least 10 articles mentioning the Code Talkers that have disappeared from Army and DoD websites. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up of almost entirely second-generation Japanese Americans who fought in Europe during World War II, a National Guard article was removed and a U.S. Army page was deleted, but restored following complaints. The Harlem Hellfighters were a highly decorated, segregated unit of black soldiers first formed from the New York National Guard in World War I. They were the first American recipients of France's illustrious Croix de Guerre, and many of them received the Legion of Honor. The Air Force initially tried to remove reference to the Tuskegee Airmen from its curriculum, but later reversed course. The Army did remove pages honoring the WASPs, the Philippine Scouts of World War II, and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and Mexican-American Medal of Honor recipients. A story about a black Army officer, Charles Calvin Rogers, a Medal of Honor recipient, was taken down and then later restored. Axios found other removed pages about Indigenous American contributions, including profiles of Iraq combat veterans, a chronicle of Native American women who served, a news alert that an Oglala Sioux, South Dakota National Guardsman had obtained an exemption to wear his hair long in accordance of his religion. The DoD has removed at least 3 pages referring to the Holocaust, and while we confirm at least one of the pages were restored, the other 2 are unknown. The AP reports, with U.S. officials' confirmation, that over 26,000 images have been flagged for removal across every military branch. These include the Enola Gay, which dropped the first atomic bomb on Japan, the first women to pass Marine infantry training, and a World War II Medal of Honor recipient. The vast majority of the Pentagon purge targets women and minorities. It also removes a large number of posts that mention various commemorative months, such as those for Black and Hispanic people and women. Let's take a moment to examine this. Yes, this is the result of Trump's DEI purge, but it is fed by Pete Hegseth, an obvious Christian nationalist, which is tied to white supremacy. He was barred from working at President Biden's inauguration and was reported by fellow service members as being a potential insider threat. Hegseth himself wrote in his book that Muslim immigrants and refugees threaten the traditional Christian fabric, quote unquote, of the United States. And I quote, "Our present moment is much like the 11th century. We don't want to fight, but like our fellow Christians 1,000 years ago, we must. Arm yourself, metaphorically, intellectually, physically. Our fight is not with guns. Yet." Hegseth is a member of Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship, a small, newly founded church co-founded by Doug Wilson, a self-described Christian nationalist who embraces a theocratic view of Christian dominance of all institutions of society. Wilson has written that slavery produced a genuine affection between the races, quote unquote, and argues that homosexuality should be a crime. Wilson holds patriarchal views, asserting that giving women the right to vote was a mistake, that women holding office should be, quote, reckoned not as a blessing, but as a curse, end quote, and that women should not be, quote, mustered for combat, end quote. Does this sound familiar? That's Hegseth's position as well. Trump, for his part, fired Air Force General C.Q. Brown Jr., a black man, who is chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, replacing him with Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Raisin Kane, a white man. Trump fired Coast Guard Commandant Linda Fagan, a woman, replaced by Admiral Stephen Poulin, a white man. Trump fired Gwynne Wilcox, the first black woman to serve on the National Labor Relations Board. Trump also fired 2 commissioners of the EEOC, both women. Do we see a trend here? Donald Trump attacked and snubbed the first black president of the United States. Donald Trump is a racist. Though he surrounds himself with women, he requires them to be beauty queens. He doesn't respect women. He lusts after them. He's known for his sexualization of women, his rape of women, and his pedophilia with a 13-year-old girl. But before I go down that track, let me get back to the point at hand. Erasing history, particularly the history of prominent minorities and women, is right out of the authoritarian playbook. Beyond that, Trump and his cronies are experts at lying over and over and over again until it becomes their truth and that of their supporters. Without evidence to the contrary, their lies are harder to combat. No, there never were any minority Medal of Honor recipients. Only white men contributed to the success of U.S. military campaigns. No, women shouldn't have the right to vote. They just screw everything up. No, Kamala Harris was a horrible individual who knew nothing about how to run a country. No, she never ran circles around Trump during a debate. Actually, they haven't had to remove any history for their followers to believe what Trump says about Kamala. Despite seeing it with their own eyes, somehow Trump was more presidential, had better ideas, was smarter. I credit much of that attitude to their followers' racist and misogynistic views. My point is, we're watching as the history of minorities and women is erased from the official record. The erasure of our history is happening right before our eyes. Why does that matter? Because this is just one more method of changing the reality and nature of the United States. In autocracies large and small, historic revisionism has become a priority. Strong men demand new narratives to remove all stigma of the leader's illegitimacy. They use the term traitor to demonize adversaries and attack their opposition because they're not real Turks or real Russians or real Hungarians. You can choose your country. The newly invented history is used to serve as a reference to who is a true patriot, whether they be opposition politicians, uncooperative business owners, independent-minded school teachers, poets, writers, podcasters, or citizens who are gay. Vladimir Putin is the master of modern historical falsification. In 2007, he launched a full redesign of Russia's high school history curriculum. The new history focused on the period from the end of World War II through Putin's leadership and demanded a narrative of internal contradictions and double interpretations, removing any critical assessments of Stalin's purges, mention of the Hitler-Stalin pact, criticism of the Iron Curtain that divided Europe, and similar dark corners of Soviet history. The new text was designed to emphasize that Russia has nothing to apologize for. Not the purges, not the Ukrainian terror famine, not the crushing of democratic revolutions in Hungary, East Germany, or Czechoslovakia, or the absence of freedom at home. In China, Russia, and North Korea, control of the historical narrative is a state priority. History is meant to reinforce the party and the leader's reputation and control. In Venezuela, it was designed to glorify a system, Marxian socialism, and it has failed everywhere it has been attempted. There are no history wars in dictatorships like Russia or China. There is a single version of history, stamped and sealed by the leadership and taught in classrooms, through culture, and on the internet. The Nazis destroyed book collections on Judaism, Freemasonry, and Marxism. They created a cult, a mythos of the Aryan race, which ironically were Indo-European nomadic pastoralists who migrated to the Indian subcontinent around 1500 BCE as the ideological precipice of German society. Erasing history, changing history, revisionism are all forms of propaganda designed to enhance the power of the dictator by removing those who don't fit with the idea of an ideal citizen, by minimizing the contributions of groups not in the majority. By revising our history, it is a means to control the population, reprogram the youth, and enhance the cult of personality. Erasing and revising history creates an erosion of trust in the institutions and undermines the importance of historical knowledge. It creates doubt about the veracity of scientific principles and undermines popular support. It reinforces and perpetuates biases or creates new ones by focusing on certain groups or perspectives at the expense of others. It ignores complexity, oversimplifying complex events, leading to a lack of understanding of nuance and context. And it fuels division between social and political groups. Let's look at another avenue for historical revisionism, possibly more depraved than the administration itself, if that's possible. White Christian nationalism. Most people, when hearing the phrase, misunderstand it to mean being a patriotic Christian. But it is, in reality, a belief that celebrates the privileges and sacred history of liberty and rightful rule of white conservative Christians, particularly white evangelical Christians. It is primarily this group that advances the belief that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, that our forefathers intended only white Christians to be citizens of and claim the advantages of our free society. They believe that people of color, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and Native Americans have no place in our society. And in Trump's voice, they hear his reinforcement of their beliefs and values. The United States, however, was founded on popular sovereignty. The idea that the government's power ultimately comes from the people, and that the people have the right to govern themselves. Limited government. The principle that the government's power is restricted, and that it cannot act arbitrarily or without legal constraints. Separation of powers. The division of governmental authority among three distinct branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial, to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. Checks and balances, a system where each branch of government can limit the power of the other two branches, ensuring that no single branch can dominate. The principle that everyone, including government officials, are subject to and accountable under the law, ensuring fairness and preventing arbitrary actions. Equality, the belief that all individuals are created equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities, a cornerstone of the Declaration of Independence. Individual rights, the recognition of inherent, unalienable rights that belong to all individuals, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as outlined in the Declaration of Independence and protected by the Bill of Rights. Freedom, the principle that individuals should have the freedom to think, speak, and act as they choose, within the bounds of the law, and that the government should not infringe upon these freedoms. Freedom includes freedom of religion, that there is no state religion, and each person is free to worship who, what, and how they so choose. Andrea Butler, a professor of religion and current chair of the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Religious Studies, recently said of white Christian nationalists, quote, "The church is not a cruise ship. The church is a battleship. And that is how they see it," end quote. She further spoke of racial dynamics, the appeal of authoritarianism to these groups who feel they have been anointed by God to take political power. Feelings aren't facts, she said, but feelings drive a lot of what's going on. Reverend Dr. Kevin Shaw, president of Milwaukee Inner City Congregations Allied for Hope, said on the eve of the 2024 GOP convention, quote, "We must understand that democracy is in danger." Shaw said, his voice rising. That's why we're here tonight, to protect our democracy, to reject white Christian nationalism, and to build the beloved community. He spoke of the people targeted by racism because of their sexual orientation or because they're not Christian, all of whom constantly have to prove that they belong here in America. White Christian nationalism teaches exclusion and control, Shaw said. Regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or sexuality, we all belong. We are all part of the democracy. We are and have been witnessing this for a long time. But what we're witness to now is the application of the autocrat's handbook for dismantling democracy. The systematic erasure of historical contributions by minorities and women, alongside the growing influence of white Christian nationalism, is not accidental. It is a deliberate strategy from the authoritarian playbook. By revising history, suppressing dissent, and reinforcing exclusionary narratives, Trump and his allies are reshaping the American landscape to fit their vision of power and control. This is not just about politics. It's about the very fabric of democracy and truth itself. History teaches us that when facts are erased and rewritten to serve those in power, oppression follows. The United States was founded on principles of freedom, equality, and self-governance, principles that are now under direct attack. If we allow these erasures and distortions to go unchallenged, we risk losing more than just historical truth. We risk the very foundations of our democracy. Now is the time to stand against revisionism, to defend the voices and legacies of those who shaped this nation, and to ensure that the true history of America, one of diversity, struggle, and progress, is preserved for future generations. The fight for democracy is a fight for truth, and we must remain vigilant in defending both. This has been a broadcast of Radio Free North America. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more discussions on protecting our democracy. Thanks for listening. Stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, stay free.